The pamphlet, Woman as Inventor, formally declared the innovative idea that due credit be given to an invention made by a woman inventor. Published in 1870 during the heart of the women's rights movement, the pamphlet impacted how people thought about a woman's role as an inventor and a thinker. The pamphlet changed how women not only viewed themselves, but how men viewed them as well. Since the creation of the Constitution, women's rights were not clearly defined. Although they were citizens of the United States, they were not legally recognized as such. Women were ruled under what was defined as common law. Common law recognized women as dependent on men. Therefore, they were not given the right to the safety of their body, to their children. They couldn't own property. They couldn't vote. Men were even encouraged to beat their wives to enforce obedience, as long as it was with anything smaller than their thumb. Hence the coming of the phrase, rule of thumb. Women grew increasingly upset about this and rebelled in different ways, through different parties of different sizes and different ways of asking the government for rights. For example, Abigail Smith Adams, the wife of John Adams, protested against the formation of a new government in which women would be unrecognized, demanding not only a voice, but representation. Sarah Grimke began her speaking career as an abolitionist in 1836, but she was silenced by male abolitionists who considered her public speaking a liability. Many other small, more regional movements took place as well. This changed, however, in 1848 when the first National Women's Rights Convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York. Over 300 people were in attendance. At this convention, many ideas were cast and debated. Using the Declaration of Independence as a reference, Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote the Declaration of Sentiments and Resolutions. It started out with a very popular preamble, but with a twist. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, it stated. At the end of the convention, over 100 men and women had signed the demand for rights. About this time, Matilda Joslyn Gage entered the women's rights movement. She later became good friends with Susan B. Anthony and several times spoke with her on their U.S. on Trial campaign for women's rights. This led Gage into the heart of the women's suffrage movement. She later wrote many pieces of literature, including her work on the history of women's suffrage, and many other pieces such as Is Woman Her Own?, Prospectus, Indian Citizenship, All the Rights I Want, A Sermon Against Women, God in the Constitution, and perhaps her most well-known, Woman, Church, and State. Woman as Inventor was another self-published work of Gage's. Sue Boland, an expert on Gage and her work, said, she was pointing out the work of women in a non-traditional field in which they were not supposed to have any talent. Women were and are still seen as being good at soft professions, involving communication, empathy, compassion, working with people, i.e., right brain functioning. While there may be some biological basis for women having more talent than men in these areas, that doesn't mean that women can't do math, science, and areas of work involving hard facts, logic, and reason. Left brain. Gage's pamphlet was one of, if not the first pamphlet, to formally declare this idea that women could indeed perform complicated tasks, such as inventing and being of use to society. In her pamphlet, Woman as Inventor, she references many common inventions that were believed to be created by men or were given credit to men when it actually was created by a woman. A majority of people who, when asked who invented the cotton gin, would reply, Eli Whitney, as they were most likely taught in grade school. Gage wrote of the cotton gin in her pamphlet, how the original idea for the cotton gin was that of Miss Catherine Littlefield Greene's. Whitney had been staying with Greene while he attended school nearby. Greene proposed he make a machine that would separate seeds from cotton. Whitney fiddled with the idea and came up with a prototype. His prototype was usable, but shredded some of the cotton, and there were still seeds that would need to be hand-picked out, not saving hardly any time in doing so. Greene then proposed using a wire type brush to comb the cotton fibers from the seeds, and thus the cotton gin was born. However, due to the fact she was a woman, Greene was unable to receive even the slightest hint of credit for her work on the innovation. All of the ramifications and credit were given to Whitney. Now, many people, after hearing about a woman inventing the cotton gin, they would be in disbelief because it wasn't socially acceptable in any way, shape, or form for a woman of that time to be an inventor. Now imagine having to explain to someone in this day and age. It would be fairly difficult, but plausible for most. Now imagine having to convince someone 140 years ago, when it wasn't even acceptable for women to be inventors or do math or other mathematical things. Gage was the one who took on this task by self-publishing Woman as Inventor, putting herself out for ridicule and demotion in order for people to simply hear of her new innovative idea. This idea was so foreign, many people at first dismissed it and figured Gage to be yet another odd suffragist mover, and even though many people thought of it as rubbish and nonsense, it did in fact put the idea into their heads, often causing them to consider it, and eventually they would become more willing to accept it. This initial way of thinking set Gage ahead of most. As Gloria Steinem said, she was ahead of the women who were ahead of the women who were ahead of their time. Many women, after reading Woman as Inventor, felt encouraged to step forward with their inventions and receive the credit they deserved for innovations of their own. More men as well started to see women in a new light. It impacted the way women were seen in society. Slowly but surely, men started to accept the idea of women playing a role in society, but this wasn't done without a fight. The right to invent and patent was just one of the many rights women were fighting for. They held various events, lectures, and even parades. They created promotional posters, songs, and cartoons, and would even visit people's homes with suffrage literature, picture, and anything else they could find to try and persuade people to let them have the vote. Many women were a part of this movement, putting forth all of these actions towards getting suffrage, because it seemed that as soon as women would get the vote, they would get their rights and freedom, even recognition as well. In 1920, women finally got the right to vote. After 72 years of deliberating, they finally found social justice. Slowly but surely, in the years that followed, their rights became more evident as well. Yet even now that the right to invent and patent was theirs, more women found themselves being pushed away from these fields. When many of the women who had become interested in these fields sought educational enrichment, they were told not to bother, because it would be too hard and that they wouldn't like it. Still today, many women are pushed away from these fields, but more and more are defying the odds and pursuing their dreams. Without Matilda Joslyn Gage's courageous piece, Woman as Inventor, women of then and even women of today might have never taken that step and invented, leaving society in the dark. The innovative idea declared in Woman as Inventor has impacted and will forever change society as we know it.